Hello guys, and welcome to this lecture from Trust Tutorials. So in this lecture we're going to look at the CSS grid layout. Okay, most people are aware about Flexbox. Most people have used Flexbox, but in this lecture we're going to look at the grid system and how it makes your web development process more powerful and more easy. Okay, so essentially, if you have not watched my Flexbox video, I'll leave a link in the description to the video where I talk about Flexbox. Okay, all right. So typically in Flexbox you have a one directional layout. Okay, and using the display flex property, you can easily lay out your page. Okay, so either in rows or column, essentially one direction. So I'm assuming that this is like a page or a web page, okay, with 4 sections within a flex container. So this is div 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so basically all I need to do is that I just need to set display flex on the container housing these 4 divs, and they will be aligned side by side. Okay, I can then go ahead and set the flex direction to either row or column. Okay, so essentially in CSS Flexbox you can only outline layouts in one direction. Okay, which could either be a row or a column. Okay, but then CSS Grid Layout is the most powerful layout system available in CSS. Ideally, CSS Grid Layout is meant to be combined with Flexbox. Okay, and when you learn about the CSS grid system, combining it with Flexbox is going to give you superpower when you're designing. CSS Grid Layout is a two-dimensional system, okay, meaning that it can handle both columns and rows. Okay, unlike Flexbox, that is just a one-directional system that handles layout in either rows or column. Okay, so essentially it's simple to work with CSS Grid Layout. You simply need to apply the property display and grid to a container. Okay, and then let's just quickly go into my text editor and see what we have. But before then, I'm going to show you what we're going to be able to build and achieve at the end of this tutorial. So at the end of this tutorial, I'm going to build this section using both CSS Grid and Flexbox. So basically what I'm going to do is, let me just increase the width of my browser. So this is what we have. Now if I try to shrink the size of the browser, you see that the content, the items here, the grid items here adjusts as the width of the browser changes. So I'll go ahead and keep shrinking the width of the browser, and as you can see here, it's now in 2 rows. So this is row 1 and this is row 2. Okay, and 2 columns as well. Now if I still go ahead and further reduce the width of the browser, you see that it's now displayed in columns. Okay, so my grid items are displayed in columns. So let me scroll down and show you. Okay, now it's interesting to note because we're going to build this without writing a single media query. Basically we are just going to use CSS Grid and combine it with Flexbox. Okay, so basically that's what we're going to do, and this is something similar to what you'd likely do in the real world. Okay, so we've looked at how the CSS Flexbox is structured. Okay, so we said it's either in rows or columns. Okay, so that's either horizontally or vertically. Now supposing there was a situation where we needed to bring this box down here and we wanted it to occupy all of the width. So I'm going to go to my next tab and show you what I mean. So supposing we wanted to achieve this setup where we have these 3 boxes on the first row, okay, and this last one here on the next row, okay, but occupying 3 columns. Okay, that will not be possible in Flexbox, but the grid layout gives us the power to achieve this very easily. Okay, and basically that's what we're going to learn in this tutorial. So but then there are some terms I would like us to be familiar with before we get into the coding proper. So I'll go to my code editor and let's see what we have. So basically this is index.html. We have a div with a class of container, and within that div we have 4 divs with classes of box 1 to 4. Okay, So what I'm going to do is I'll right click and I'll just open this so that we can see it. Okay, so basically this is what we have. Let me increase the size here. All right, so this is what we have here. Now, the first div here that contains these other divs with classes of box 1 to 4 is actually called the grid container. Okay, while the content of this grid here is known as the grid items. Okay, so I want us to bear that in mind as we begin the process of designing. So I'll go to my styles.css. We have a styles.css that is linked from the HTML here. So I'll go to my styles.css, and basically in the styles.css we simply have these rules here, and our box 1 to 4 have different backgrounds. Okay, that's what we have here. Okay, so let me shrink up my browser so that we can start designing. So what we want to do is we want to try and achieve this setup here using the grid layout. So I'll go to my grid layout, and the first thing I will do is I'll come to a new line, and I'll say .container, and I'll simply say display grid, and I'll say grid and save. So apparently that doesn't do anything on the page. Okay, that's because there are still more properties we need to add. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to affect the grid. I'm going to work with the grid column. So let me go to my design. So the column goes like this. So this is a column, this is another column, this is another column. Okay, so they go vertically, right, while the rows go horizontally. So this is a row and this is another row. So essentially we have 2 rows here. Yeah, in this first row we have 3 columns. Okay, all right, and then there's also a concept known as grid lines. Okay, so in the columns here we have, this is line 1, this is line 2, line 3, and line 4, while for the rows this is line 1, line 2, and line 3. Is that understood? Okay, so let's go back to our grid layout. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to write a rule for the column. So what I'll do is I'll say grid, and essentially I'll say template column. So it's my text editor is giving me options here. So grid template columns, right? And I would say that I want 2 columns of, let's just say 250 pixels each. So I'll just say 250 px. I'll give a space and say 250 px, and then I'll save. Okay, so maybe I should shrink this down a little bit so we can see what we are doing. All right, so basically what we have here is that we have 2 columns, each 250 pixels, and because we specified that we wanted 2 columns, it's the grid system automatically brought down the box 3 and 4, you know, to the next row and created columns for them. Okay, so so this is the first way we can. So let's just say we want a 3rd column, for example. So I would say 250 pixels, 250, and then I'll save. Okay, oh, that should be px, and then I'll save. Okay, so let me shrink this down a little bit so we can see. So basically you see here that we have 3 columns, okay, 250 pixels each, and the 4th column is automatically brought to the next row. Okay, so but instead of writing out, you know, specifying out the pixels like this, we can also say we want, let's say, 2 columns of 50% each, so 50% of the width and another 50% of the width, and then we save. Okay, this way we would have something that is more responsive. So if I shrink the size of the browser, you see that it's more responsive compared to the previous one where we wrote 250 pixels. Okay, all right, so now what we're going to do next is we're going to look at the grid template rows. Okay, so basically this first one we wrote here is grid template columns. So I'm just going to say grid template, and my code editor brings out the property for me. So grid template rows, and essentially what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say I want it to have 200 pixels, okay, for the first row, and 200 px for the second row, and then I'm going to save. Okay, so you see that we have this guy, you know, spread out now. Okay, I just wanted to do it so that we can have space on the page. Now let's go back to our grid templates column. Now instead of writing 50%, 50%, there is a better way to specify the value for our grid template column, and we do that using fractions. So for example, instead of saying 50%, I can just say I want it to be one fraction. So I'll say 1fr space 1fr, okay, and essentially nothing will change on the page. If I want 3 columns, I can simply give a space here and say I also want 1fr, and then I'll save. And as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, and then the fourth box is automatically brought to the last portion of the page. Okay, all right, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you about grid okay, now supposing we wanted this box 4 to span from this first box here and end somewhere here. In other words, supposing we wanted it to occupy 2 cells, okay, so one of these is known as a grid cell. Okay, so supposing we wanted box 4 to occupy 2 cells, what we need to do is we need to come to box 4 itself and say that we want it to start from this point here to this point here. And the way we do that is we count using the grid line. So this is grid line 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so we'll come to box 4 and we'll say we want the grid column start. So I would say grid, and I'll say column hyphen start, and I'll say that I want it to start from grid line 1. Okay, and then I'll then say grid column end, and I'll say I want it to end on line 3. So I'll just add 3 there, and then I'll save. Okay, so you see now that we have this box 4 occupying 2 cells here. Now it's quite easy if we want to make it such that it spans from here up to the end. So all we need to do is say 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if I change this to 4 and save, you'll see that it spans, you know, all through. Now this is practically what we have here on this demo here. Okay, all right, so let's do something more interesting. So supposing we wanted the box 1 to occupy these 2 columns, okay, and of course box 4 will definitely have to move and start here. So let me first come to box 4 and say that I want it to start from grid 2, and you can see it starts from grid line 2. And what I can do is I can then go to box 1 and set it to start from box 1 row grid. So what I can do is I can then go to box 1 and set the grid row start from 1, 2, 3. Okay, so let me just come here and do it. I'll say grid hyphen row and start, and I'll then set it to 1, and I'll say grid row end, and I'll set it to 3. Okay, and I'll save. And as you can see, box 1 is occupying 2 cells, or 2 rows, grid row cells. Okay, so essentially that's how the grid system works. But of course, this doesn't look like a good way to write a, you know, start and end grid column and stuff like that. So there's a better way we can do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment out this, for example. So I'll just comment this out, and I would say grid column. Okay, and remember we want it to start from 2 and end in 4. So I'll say 2/4, and I'll save, and nothing changes. Okay, so I can do the same for the row. I can come here and comment this out, and I'll then say grid row, and I'll say starting from 1 and ending in 3, and then I'll save. So nothing changes as well. So basically that's how we can specify how we want to organize the layout. So we can have very complex layouts using this grid system. But what I want us to do is I want to show you a better way to even achieve this. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to comment this out, and I'm also going to comment this out, and I'll save. So we are back to how we started. Yeah, so let's come here and add a property. So the name of the property we're going to add is known as grid area. Okay, so I'll say grid area, and basically the grid area, we just need to give this box 1 a name, okay, that would be identified with. So what I'm just going to say, I'm just going to call it box 1, and I will copy this, come to the next line. Oh, I need to copy it one more time. I'll paste this here. I'll change this to box 2, and I'll do the same for the next one. So box 3 and box 4. I'll save. And okay, because I saved now, I've actually distorted the page because I have not actually written all that is necessary for this to have meaning. So what I'll do is I'll come here and I'll then write a property known as grid template areas. So grid template areas. Now the way this property works is that it helps us organize our content into the rows and the columns. So what I'll do is, remember we have 3 rows here, right? Sorry, we have 3 columns here. So I'll just put double quotes, and I would say that on the first row I want box 1 and box 2 and box 3. Okay, I'll come down, I'll add another double quotes, and I'll say that on the second row I want box 4 and box 4 and box 4. Okay, so essentially let me save this and show you what I mean. So what this does is that on the first row, yeah, we have 3 columns, so 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR, and then in each of the columns we place box 1, 2 and 3, and then on the last row, which is the second row here with box 4, we just use box 4 to occupy the 3 columns. Yeah, now supposing we wanted to occupy just 2 columns with the second row, all I need to do is just to delete the last box 4 and add a dot. Okay, and then save. So you see that the box 4 doesn't span to this last cell here. Okay, so if I do that for this one as well, add a dot and save, same. I can maybe Ctrl Z here and add a dot in this first place, so I'll just say dot and save, and you see box 4 here. If I wanted box 1 to span from this column down here, this row down here, all I just need to do is to say box 1, and let's say if I want box 4 also to span to this area here, all I need to do is to say box 4 and save. Okay, so I hope you're seeing how we can lay out our page using the grid system. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of this. So let me just come here and say box 4, and I'll just get rid of this as well. So I'll say dots, and I'll say dots, and then I'll save. Now what I want to show you this time is I want to show you how you can use the column and row gaps. Okay, so first what I'll do is I'll just say column gap. Now because I want to add like some margin between the columns, yeah, so what I'll do is I'll say column gap, and let's say I just want to add 10 pixels, so I'll say 10 px and save. And as you can see, there is this margin between the grid columns. If I want to do the same for the row, all I just need to do is to duplicate this and say row gap and save. And as you can see, we have some margin, okay, between these guys here. But of course, there is a shortcut we can use to get this done, okay. If we wanted to add the same margin around the grid cells, all we just need to do, so first off, I'll comment this out, and so let me comment this out, and I'll just say grid gap, so hyphen gap. Okay, so apparently the grid gap property is obsolete, but I think it can still work. But if it's obsolete, then I don't think we should use it. So I just use the grid gap property and it still works, okay. But my code editor is telling me that that property is obsolete. So it says here that property is obsolete, avoid using it, blah blah blah. All right, so I'm going to avoid using it. I'm going to follow my code editor's instruction. Okay, so essentially, let me save this. So we are back to where we were. Now let's see how we can add in some justify items and align items, just like we do in Flexbox. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come to the next line and I'll just say justify, and I'll say items. Okay, so in the Flexbox system is actually justify content, but here I'm using justify items. So for example, if I say I want to justify items, remember that the justify items property affects the display on the horizontal axis, okay. So if I say maybe something like center and save, you see that it moves all of the grid items to the center. So let's try another one. Let's say start, okay, which is similar to flex start. Let's say end, okay, and then the default is stretch. Okay, so this is the default. Okay, so there's also the align items property. So align items, and of course we can do center and save, and so basically we can do start and end. Okay, so basically we can do all of that and even stretch. Okay, so apparently stretch is the default for the justify item and align items property, but also we can come into the grid items individually and set some of this property. So if I come into box 1, for example, I can say something like let's say justify, but this time it will be self. So justify self, align self, and I can say something like center and save, and as you can see, this property affects just the first grid item here. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this, so maybe I'll just comment it out because I want you to have it, and I'll save, and we're back to where we started. Okay, so what I want to do next is I want to show you how we can have a pretty responsive grid columns. Okay, and basically the way we do that is we use grid templates column and we use a different value. So what I'm going to do is I'm first of all going to comment some of this. So let me just comment this grid templates column out. Okay, but I still want you to have the code, so I would not want to absolutely get rid of it. So grid templates column is out. Okay, I'm using grid template areas. Okay, so maybe I'm going to comment grid template areas out. So I practically have commented almost all of the code, and so let me get rid of this and this and this. I hope this is not confusing. Essentially, I'm just commenting out the code. Okay, and for the grid templates rows, I'm also going to comment it out. So essentially I've commented almost everything out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give all of this a height. So I'm going to say something like dot container, and I would say that I want all the divs within the container to have this property. So I'll just give it a height of maybe 100 pixels. Yes, and then I'll save. Okay, so we have it, displayed out. Now what I want to show you is I want to show you another way we can do the grid hyphen template and columns. Okay, so instead of specifying one FR, one FR, one FR, what I'll do is I'll come here and say repeat. Okay, so that should be repeat, and I would then add some values in the brackets. So the first thing I'm going to do for this property I'm going to show you is, so I'm going to say auto fit, right? And this is actually the property that is used very commonly when people when we work on real projects. Okay, so I would say auto fit, and I will then say maybe I'll say 200 pixels, so 200 px. So now I'm going to say grid template columns. Okay, so basically this property, but before then maybe I should just comment this out, and because I really don't need it now. Okay, and I'm going to add a bit of padding, so let me just do some padding, and I'll just say something like maybe 30 px, so we can have this. Okay, so spaced out. Oh, it shouldn't be here, so I'll just take this out, and so I would say something like dot container, and I'll target all the child divs within the container and add the padding right inside it. So I would say something like 30 px, and I'll save. Okay, so we have this guy spaced out. All right, so what I'll do now is I'll then come and get this property here, so grid template columns, and basically I'm going to say, so let me add my semicolon first, and basically I'm going to say repeat. Okay, and the repeat actually is going to take some values. So the first thing I would say for the repeat is that I would say I want it to be auto fit, so that should be auto hyphen fit. Okay, I'll add a comma, and I will set its min max, and the min max is also going to take some value. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I'm telling the browser that I want a responsive grid columns, okay, but that I want the minimum width of each of the columns to be, so I'm setting that to 200 pixels. Okay, and I will then say the maximum should be 1 fr. Okay, all right, so but that should not be here, so let me just get this out of here. So this should actually be in the main container, so I'll just Ctrl X this, and I'll paste it here, and I'll save. And as you can see, we have our columns, okay, displayed, automatically. So all of what we achieved using, this much number of code, we did that using just this grid template column value. So if I try to resize this, my browser now, you will see that it adjusts. So you see, it keeps adjusting like that. Okay, so if I change this to maybe 300 and save, you see that it's, it then displays, in columns. Okay, so these are some of the key properties in the grid system that is commonly used. Okay, now what I want us to do next is I want us to do something practical. Okay, I want us to design this layout here using both the grid system and Flexbox. Okay, so let me just open this and let me scroll. So you see that it adjusts. Okay, so we're going to use both the grid system and Flexbox to achieve this very quickly. So what I'll do is I'll open this up, and I'll come to another file. So this is actually grid.html. Okay, and within the grid.html there is a linked CSS file, grid.css. I should leave all of these files I'll leave a download link in the description so that you can get all of these files we are working with. So I'll quickly just write my markup so we can start. So the first thing I'll do is I'll add a section with a class of about, a div with a class of container, and within that container I'm going to have 4 divs. So I would say dot box1, and I'll say I want 4, and I'll hit the tab key. So I have 4 divs here, but then I want this to be box 2 and 3 and 4. Okay, now within each of these boxes I'm simply going to add a heading. So I'll just say h2, and the first is going to say welcome, and then I would have a paragraph, simply going to add lorem ipsum, and I'm going to add 40 words. Okay, so basically what I'll do is I'll just copy this and paste it in the other boxes, and then I'll save. Okay, so if I open this up with live server so we can see what we are doing, so this is basically what we have here. Okay, all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to now add some styles. So basically in our grid .css file, we just have this universal style here, removing the padding and the margin, and we have a background for the body. Okay, so what we are going to do is we're going to start adding some styles here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to target the dot about. Okay, I'm going to give it a width of 100%, and I'm going to give it a background color of, let me just get the background color. Okay, so that's the background color. So this is it right here. Next, I'm going to target the container. So I'll say dot container, and essentially I'm going to give the container a max width of 1200 pixels, and I'm saying I want the margin to be 0 and auto. So basically that will center it on the page, and I would add some padding, and I already have these values. So the first on top, I'll give it a padding of 50px and 20px, and I'll give it 0 bottom and 20px on the right. Okay, so I'll save. Now within this container here is where I will then add my display grid property. So I'll say display, and I'll set it to grid, and then I'll then say my grid template columns. I'll then set it to repeat, and I would say auto fit. I'll add a comma, and I would say min max. Open and close a bracket, and I'll say I want it to be 250px and 1 fr. I'll save, and as you can see we have these items displaying like this. So what we'll do now is we are quickly going to style the items. Okay, so what I'll do first is I'll say dot container, and I simply want to target all the divs, all the child elements in the container. So I would say I want a display of flex. So you see we are combining Flexbox with the grid system. They are actually meant to work together, yeah? And if I save this, of course it will distort it, but if I say flex direction, and I'll say column, okay, so it's back to how it was. And then I would add some padding, and basically I'm going to add a padding of 40 pixels. And lastly, I would set my Z index or maybe I should leave this out so you see why we are setting the Z index. So you see that our page is actually taking shape. Okay, so now let's style the items within the boxes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say dot container, and I'm going to target the H2, and basically I'm simply going to set the font size to, okay, maybe I'm going to leave out the font size, so I'll just set the color to orange red, and I'll set the text transform to uppercase, and I'll set a margin on the bottom. So I want to add a space just on up under this text here, so I'll say margin bottom, and I'm simply going to just add 5 pixels, and I'll save. Okay, so we have some space here. Now what we'll do next is let's set the background for each of the boxes, and the way to do that is we are simply going to target the odd and even child. So I'll say dot container, and I want to target all the div items, okay, within the container div, but I want to target the nth child. So but this time I'm going to look for only the odd, so 1, 3, 5 and so on. Okay, so we'll add our style and say we want it to have a background color of #EEE, and then I'll save. So these first two have this background color. So what I'll do is I'll simply just copy this one more time, and I'll come down and say I want to target the even children this time, and I'm going to change the color here to DD, E2 and EB. Okay, and then I'll save. Okay, so we have two different background colors here. Yeah, so basically what I'll do is I'll come to my container and I'll just set a column gap. So no, this should be row gap actually, so row gap, and I'll just say 10px, and then I'll save. So we have some kind of gap here. Yeah, so let me look at the initial one we worked with, and let's see. Okay, so we're not quite there yet, okay, because we have this guy here, this curvy background here. Okay, so I used a tool for that, and let me just show you the tool I used. So I used a tool, a web app, which is getwave.io. So it's actually a web app that you can use to generate SVG waves, okay, that you can use on your background. Okay, so this is the tool I use. So this is getwaves.io. So you can just go ahead and select, you know, the shape of the wave you want. So if I move this, it increases like that and stuff. So I can select that I want it to be on the bottom, okay, or the top. So but this time we want it on the bottom, and we can go ahead and change it. So this is more like what we have. Okay, so basically what you need to do is you then need to click on this cloud and download icon here, and you can either download the SVG, okay, or you can just copy the SVG code. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the SVG code and I'm going to place it within my HTML file. So basically I'll just come to grid.html, and just below my section here I'll just paste in that, and then I'll save, and let's come and see what we have. Okay, so we have our shape here. Yeah, so basically let's open up this and see what we've done so far. So you see that as we shrink our text here, you see that it's, you know, adjusts, you know. So let me click shrinking it, it adjusts, and when we get to the mobile screen, you see it also adjusts here. All right, so basically that's how you can combine the grid system and Flexbox and achieve a very responsive design on your website or your app or something. So that's the lecture. Like I said, I'll leave links in the description to my short course on Flexbox and some other resources. I'm also going to try and leave links in the description to the source code here, so you can actually have access to them. If you're not subscribed to my channel, I want to encourage you to subscribe right now. See you in another video. Thank you.